As we all know, China is known for its import and export trade since 1949 in Western Han Dynasty until now. That is why China has become the world's most populous country in terms of trade import and export. Without further ado, let's get to know the real meaning of import and export.
So let's start with what is the meaning of import and what is the meaning of export. Imports are the goods and services that are purchased from the rest of the world by a country's resident, rather than buying domestically produced items. Since import transactions require payments to sellers in another country, there is an outflow of funds from the country. Next, what is the meaning of export? Exports are goods and services that are produced domestically but then sold to customers that live in other countries. Since export transactions require selling domestic goods and services to foreign buyers, export results in an inflow of funds into the seller's country.
Whoa, what an interesting info, Akila. By the way, did you guys know that China international trade has happened since Western Han Dynasty, when the famous Silk Road through Central Asia was pioneered by Chinese envoys? In the following dynasty, Chinese ships traded throughout maritime Asia, reaching as far as the African coast, while caravans extended trade contacts in Central Asia and into the Middle East. International trade in China was never a major economic activity. However, Chinese emperors considered the country to be entirely self-sufficient. During parts of the Ming and Qing dynasty, trade was officially discouraged. In the mid-18th century, the government restricted sea trade by setting up the Canton system. Today, China ranks second place in top country import with 240 billion profit, while in top country export, China ranked first place with 2419 billion profits.
Thank you, Amni, for your detailed information about history of import and export in China. Now, I will proceed with export and import goods. Top export destination of commodities from China in 2020 is USA with a share of 14.4%, Hong Kong with a share of 10.5%, and Japan with a share of 5.5%. China's top export in 2020 is automatic data processing machine, transmission apparatus, electronic integrated circuit and microassemblies. Automatic data processing machine. The value of the good from China total $187 billion in 2020. Top export destination from China in 2020 are USA, Hong Kong and Netherlands. Transmission apparatus, which is for radio telegraphy or television. The value of good from China total $187 billion in 2020. Top export destination from China in 2020 are USA, Hong Kong and Netherlands. Electronic integrated circuit and microassemblies. The value of good from China total $118 billion in 2020. Top export destination from China in 2020 are Hong Kong, Korea and other Asia. Top trading partners import stocks of China in 2020 is other Asia, next with a share of 9.76%, Japan with a share of 8.5%, and Korea with a share of 8.4%. China's top import in 2020 is electronic integrated circuit and microassemblies, petroleum oils and oils obtained from bituminous minerals crude, and iron ores concentrated, including roasted iron pyrites. Electronic integrated circuit and microassemblies. The value of good to China total $351 billion in 2020. Top trading partners of China in 2020 are other Asia, Korea and areas. Petroleum oil and oil obtained from bituminous mineral crude. The value of good to China total $176 billion in 2020. Top trading partners of China in 2020 are Saudi Arabia, Russia and Iraq. Iron ores and concentrates including roasted iron pyrites. The value of good to China total $118 billion in 2020. Top trading partners of China in 2020 are Australia, Brazil and South Africa.
Thank you, Kila, for the very well explanation. Hi, I am Dini, and now I'm going to share to you guys the analysis data trend of China's import and export from the year 2009 up until 2019. China's imports of goods had fell by roughly 11% in 2009 as a result of the global financial crisis that happened on that year. In 2010, China's import had returned to a positive growth rate. As we can see, there has been a fairly steady increase in imports from the year 2009 up until 2013. In 2013, China had surpassed the United States as the world's largest goods trader. The goods import trade value that year exceeded $2 trillion US. This has been resulting to a good exports rate in 2014. In 2015, according to China's Commerce Minister, China's imports had fell by 13.2% due to global uncertainty caused by multiple geopolitical conflicts, illness outbreaks, and terrorism. It also can be seen that it had been sloping a bit too in 2016 due to the conflict happened. In 2017, China import goods worth approximately $1.84 trillion US, representing year-on-year growth of 16%, reversing a declining trend seen in the previous 2 years. For the year 2018, according to the World Trade Organization's annual global trade report issued in April 2018, China exported more products than any other country, accounting for 12.8% of the global share, while China's goods import ranked second in the world behind the United States. Also, China's import contribution to gross domestic product, which is GDP, was estimated to be at 14.5%. In 2018, China's export exceeded the country's import by roughly $351 billion US, resulting in hefty merchandise trade supplies. China's most biggest export trade partner that were Asian and the European Union had resulting of imports totaling around 1.95 billion yuan and 1.91 billion yuan. In 2019, China had imported over $2.08 trillion US in goods. This represented a roughly 3% decline in import value over the previous year. As we can see in 2009, the exports of China had been declined, and it implies that China's exports are most broadly affected by the recession happened in the middle of 2009. For the year 2010, the export had increased, and some analysts believe that most of the increase was attributable due to seasonal factors and growth in commodity markets, and it appears that the strength of China's demand is signaling a further growth in global commerce in 2010. This rate had been increasing up until 2013. In 2013, China's export rose 7.9% year-on-year to $2.21 trillion US. Export growth slowdown in December was in line with market expectations set by Lu Ting, the chief China economist. In 2014, China's export decreased by 2.8%. China's export in 2015 is $2.15 trillion US, and it down 1.8% from the end of 2014, the first drop since 2010. The declining exports at that time were mostly due to sluggish external demand as the world economy recovered from the financial crisis. However, China's export performance outperformed those of the world's other major economies. In 2016, China's export dropped 7.7% on year, and it was the worst fall since 2009 according to Reuters. In 2017, exports of China had been rose due to the export of electromechanical products that hit 8.95 trillion, accounting for 58.4% of China's total volume of exports. In 2018, exports of China had been rose up to 11.3%. In 2019, China exported a total of 2.57 trillion, making it the number one exporter in the world. What I can conclude are China's exports have been growing steadily over the past decade.
Thank you so much, Dini, for explaining in very good details. So next, let's look at what are the effects of COVID-19 in import and export in China. As COVID-19 came out from China and spread around the world like a pandemic, surprisingly, it was not just a health disease threat. Perhaps it could affect the world economically, politically, socially, and educationally. In the first half of the year, to control the spread of the epidemic, most economies took some actions such as quarantine, lockdown, and social distancing, and their industrial development and economic growth suffered a shock suspensions, which has spread to trading partners and even to the rest of the world through trade and industrial chains. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit the supply and demand sides hard, disrupting global supply chains, limiting people's consumption, and decreasing global production, trade, and cross-border investment. As the first country affected by this epidemic and one of the world's major import and export countries, China's import and export will definitely be significantly affected. In the first half of 2020, COVID-19 reduced exports by about 40%, which is a substantial drop. However, this impact will slow off throughout 2020 and be less than 40% by the end of 2020. While the domestic supply and international demand shocks matter, the GVC contagion, the infection of the supply chain network, accounts for about 75% of that reduction. One explanation is that the international supply shock is constantly over time, while the demand shock is not. So think of a country that is badly affected. At first, consumers stop spending money, so there is no demand for imports from China. But after about 2 months or so, countries start demanding more imports such as face masks, face shields, and hand sanitizers than they would have without the disease because their own production is disrupted and they need to substitute for it with imports from China.
Thank you, Akila, for your very well information. Now, I will start to analyze data trend in China due to COVID-19 pandemic. As we can see, in January up until February, the export of China had been declined by 4% year-on-year due to global infection soared and also slowly recovery in March, which is 0.9%. While in April, China's import rate rose by 14.2% year-on-year, presenting a mixed picture of the country's economic recovery. Overseas shipment in May fell 16.7% after a surprising growth rate from the previous month but increased again by 2.7% in annual terms in June. In the month of July and also August, China's import rate remained constant for both months after a decline of 1.4% year-on-year despite the COVID-19 hitting the global demand. For September, the import surged 13.2% in US dollar terms according to China's General Administration of Customs. Import rate in October also showed a stable growth by 4.7%. Meanwhile, import growth decreased from 4.7% in October to 4.5% in November and grew again by 6.5% year-on-year in December. China's performance in export remained resilient despite the global pandemic due to a number of special factors, including a surge in export of personal protective equipment and work or study products from home, and a decline in export by some emerging market competitors, which remain severely affected by the outbreak. China's exports suffered the first blow, declining by around 70% in January and February relative to the previous year and remained depressed throughout the first half of 2020 as global infection soared. Meanwhile, from March to April, the total exports started to rise slowly by 3.6% year-on-year to $200 billion US, helped by its recovered manufacturing production sector. In May, the total export in US dollar terms declined 3.3% year-on-year, relying on continuation of strong export of medical products. China's export year-on-year increased to 0.34% in June and keep rising in July, which is 7.2% as economic activity in the rest of the world recovered and the shipment in US jumped. August export jumping to 9.5% and slowly increasing in September and October. In November, export expanded 21.2% over the previous months of the same year. Up until March 2021, China's export amounted to around $241.13 billion US, indicated over 13% increase.